Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Even though the strike ended by WestJet mechanics, further flight cancellations may take place. There are more calls for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to resign, and a new name has been brought forth as a potential successor. Political columnist Brian Lilley will explain. And we have details of a number of Lethbridge Hurricanes hockey players who've been invited to NHL development camps.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. WestJet flight disruptions are expected to continue this week. A deal was reached over the long weekend to end a strike by the airline's mechanics. The Calgary-based company says, however, that full resumption of its operations will take time and there will be further cancellations. It says part of the challenge is that airplanes are parked at 13 airports across the country and some crews need to be transported to the planes to retrieve them. A number of WestJet passengers who've been left stranded are not very happy right now. Some passengers say communication from the airline has been minimal and confusing.
I just know from my brief encounter with some of the engineers that are striking outside the airport that some of them are being paid unfairly, some of them had their wages lowered recently. So I definitely sympathize with folks that feel like they're being treated unfairly. So in terms of them, I'd say they should keep striking for what they believe in. I'd rather send a message to the leadership of WestJet to just send a message that they could, I mean, I don't know their financials, but this inaction is hurting a lot of people. Their own company as well as a lot of their customers who will likely no longer be their customers ever again.
Jonathan Quattro was also impacted by the strike. He had organized a work trip to preach the gospel in Winnipeg, but he says that fell through due to the work stoppage.
I arrived at 8 in the morning at the Calgary airport. There was a strike going on, and I was very disappointed in that fact because I had a goal. That goal was to arrive at Winnipeg by 2 in the afternoon, but unfortunately that couldn't happen. I actually do remember seeing a picture of some engineers holding up posters saying that without the engineers, you know, these companies, these organizations couldn't sort of function without them. I was quite upset, actually very sad as well, because I had that mission in mind. My church had planned months before. With the ticket, they told us that in the next 6 to 7 days, they would reimburse our tickets.
Officials at WestJet say more than 1,000 flights have been canceled since last Thursday. Many political experts say it's time for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to step down. This would potentially give his party a chance to rebuild and get re-elected in the next federal election in October of 2025. They say when the Trudeau Liberals lost a long-held Toronto seat in a recent by-election, that was a clear sign that a change may be needed.
If he were to resign, the Liberals would not only need a new leader, they would need a new identity as well. It's a risk, say strategists, especially under the rules that brought Trudeau to the head of the party, which could give special interest groups sway over the race. The timeline to elect a new leader would also be tight, even if Trudeau were to resign immediately. More and more Liberals say it may be worth the risk, even as the Prime Minister says he will be the one to lead the party into the next election. Laura Osman, The Canadian Press, Ottawa.
Political columnist Brian Lilley gives his thoughts on if Justin Trudeau should step down as Prime Minister or if he's willing to potentially go down with the Liberal ship.
I can tell you how there are many more people like Wayne Long who are either going to be stepping away and think Trudeau should, or they're just nervous about their jobs. You know, do you think George Halal in Calgary is feeling real confident he's going to win again? Randy Boissonnault in Edmonton? I know in Alberta you joke about it being Redmonton, but it won't be Liberal red very long with Boissonnault and Trudeau running the show. So he's going to keep facing these calls. I'm still in the camp that says Trudeau won't step away, but time will tell.
The vacationing Mr. Lilley will also have the name of a new potential candidate who may in fact replace Justin Trudeau as leader. We'll have details coming up after business news. South of the border, many are still talking about how U.S. President Joe Biden did not fare very well during his recent televised debate with Donald Trump. According to Canadian Press Washington correspondent Kelly Geraldine Malone, Democrat supporters were concerned that the president was not able to push back on Trump's inaccurate claims.
The president has faced constant criticism about his age, and the concerns were likely not quelled by his conduct on stage in Atlanta. When asked about age during the debate, Biden pointed out that Trump is 78. Trump appeared energetic but not always factual with his responses, while Biden's jarring speech and missteps seemed more pronounced. The results were mixed in the news and on social media, with some saying Biden got stronger as the debate went on, and others saying it just generally went poorly. For Trump, many pointed out the misinformation in his responses. The matchup saw the two leaders exchange personal barbs as well as criticism over their legacies in the Oval Office, from immigration to inflation and foreign policy. Democrats and Republicans were both hoping the early debate would light a spark for supporters. Experts have said many Americans aren't engaging with the campaigns, and a lot of would-be voters aren't supportive of either candidate.
As the trial of the Coots 2, or Anthony Olenek and Chris Carbert, enters into another week, more evidence has been presented by the RCMP to the jury, including data from the personal cell phones of the defendants. BCN's Landon Hickok is at the Lethbridge Courthouse and has more of the details. Landon.
Thanks, Al. I'm back at the Lethbridge Courthouse again as we enter another week of the trial of Anthony Olenek and Chris Carbert. Now, the jury has been presented with the witness testimony and research findings of RCMP intelligence analyst Nicole Richardson, as she has provided her research on cell phones that were seized at the Coots border blockade back in February of 2022. Of those cell phones, they have been traced back to Chris Carbert and Jerry Morin, who was released back in February of early this year of similar charges that Olenek and Carbert are facing: conspiracy to murder police officer and illegal possession of firearms. Chris Carbert's cell phone has been presented with images of a bulletproof vest and a firearm, which location data has tracked back to his residence here in Lethbridge. Now, late last week, we have also been told that Olenek had possession of 40,000 rounds of ammunition at his property near Claire's home. When RCMP officers went to investigate shortly after his arrest, they found plastic bins of rounds of ammunition for shotguns, as well as 2 pipe bombs, which they had to call an explosives team from Edmonton to investigate. As Richardson continues her testimony and presents her findings to the jury, we'll keep you posted of any updates that will come on Bridge City News. Al?
Thanks so much, Landon. That was BCN's Landon Hickok joining us from the Lethbridge Courthouse. Lethbridge police are investigating a fatal collision which took place on Canada Day. They say the driver of a northbound motorcycle on Mayor McGrath collided with a white Honda Civic around 10 p.m. Now, the car was making a left-hand turn into the parking lot of Nikiyuko Japanese Garden. Police say speed was a factor in the collision. Now, the rider of the bike, a 28-year-old Lethbridge man, suffered serious injuries and died at the scene. The passenger of the Civic, a 39-year-old Lethbridge woman, was taken to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. RCMP say Canada Day celebrations led to a tragedy in Fort Vermilion in northern Alberta. Police say a 45-year-old man was killed during Monday's parade. The Mackenzie County man fell off the equipment as he was throwing candy to kids. Police were dispatched to assist with emergency services, but the man later died. Fort Vermilion is a hamlet of 750 people located around 550 kilometers northwest of Edmonton. As of Tuesday, the Lethbridge Police Service is conducting a random phone community survey. The study aims to collect information and feedback from the public that will help evaluate the overall performance of the police service and if folks are satisfied with the job they're doing. The survey will also identify recommendations for improvement and help establish community policing priorities moving forward. The results obtained at the end of the survey will be used to organize the 2025 annual policing plan. The survey, which will be carried out over the next 2 to 3 weeks, will make the results public by the end of the summer. The survey is confidential and will last between 8 and 10 minutes. As the beautiful summer weather opens up construction season, the City of Lethbridge is back with rehabilitation work to the Whoop Up Drive Bridge. Construction will stay focused on the westbound portion of the bridge and will mainly focus on repairs on the concrete deck surface. Drivers will face lane closures and reduced speed limits now through the Labor Day long weekend, when construction is expected to wrap up. The city reminds drivers to be extra courteous to other drivers and especially on-site workers by giving themselves extra time to commute and to practice safe driving. A new study revealed which universities in Canada are among the most expensive for undergraduates. The research done by Lucky Days looked at 51 universities across the country and ranked each according to tuition costs for all students, including those from other countries. Coming in at number 1 as for being the most expensive in Canada was Trinity Western in British Columbia, with tuition estimates for undergrads being at $22,260. New Brunswick's Mount Allison was next at $10,015. In third place was Royal Roads University in BC at $92.71. Acadia University in Nova Scotia was fourth at $87.71, and rounding out the top 5 was St. Francis Xavier, also Nova Scotia, at $8,665. Here in Alberta, the University of Calgary was in 16th spot, the University of Alberta in Edmonton placed 17th, and the University of Lethbridge was in 19th position with tuition costs for undergrads, coming in at $6,429. The Lethbridge Hurricanes announced that 6 of their players have been invited to attend NHL development camps. They include Joe Arnson with the Vancouver Canucks, Noah Chadwick with the Toronto Maple Leafs, Miguel Marquez with the Nashville Predators, Harrison Menigan with the Tampa Bay Lightning, Braden Edwards with the Detroit Red Wings, and Landon Ward with the Ottawa Senators. Congrats to all the Canes players. By the way, Menigan and Marquez were players who were both drafted on July the 1st. Also drafted was Lethbridge native Tarek Parasak, who was selected 17th overall by the Washington Capitals. The right winger played for the Western Hockey League's Prince George Cougars last season, where he had 105 points, the most by a CHL rookie since Patrick Kane and Sam Gagner. Aaron Dunn, the father of 30-year-old Terry Dunn, is pleading for justice reforms following his daughter's murder in Surrey, British Columbia. Dunn spoke about the suspect's violent criminal history and recent release from custody.
My family is still angry. Tori's friends are angry. Our community is still very angry. It's difficult to have a sense that justice will be done when the justice system already failed our family, failed Tori's, and if things don't change, could continue to fail other families. Our hearts are broken and we want answers. We want to know why the judge in this case allowed a violent offender back into our community. Please don't forget Tori. Please don't forget Tori. Help us get the answers we are looking for. Help us to hold our justice system to account.
Canada's largest Pride Parade was interrupted in Toronto over the weekend when protesters supporting Palestinians in Gaza clashed with parade participants. The parade was about halfway through when it was canceled due to protesters blocking the route. Israel has released the director of a hospital in Gaza that was used as a base for the terrorist group Hamas. The man says he was abused while he was in custody.
يوم سعيد بخروجنا من معتقلات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي. نحن ومجموعة من الزملاء العاملين في وزارة الصحة وأسرى آخرين خرجوا معنا اليوم حوالي 50 أسير. تركنا وراءنا أسرى كثر، عشرات الآلاف من الأسرى يعيش الأمرين، يذوق من العذاب النفسي والجسدي ما لم يذقه أي أسير فلسطيني منذ النكبة منذ عام 48.
The war between Israel and Hamas has now reached 270 days, and there are reports that Israel Defense Forces have been able to take over a Hamas command and control center in Gaza City. According to TBN Israel's Yair Pinto now, this key capture by the IDF will be crucial in eliminating Hamas' stronghold in the region once and for all.
Let's start with news from the Gaza Strip, where soldiers of the 7th Armored Brigade, Division 36, and the Paratrooper Brigade succeeded in penetrating the heart of Gaza City and taking control of the command and control complex of the Hamas battalion there. A senior military official stated, "We entered Sajaiya to carry out what is defined as grass mowing." The IDF forces managed to surprise the Hamas forces and in about 40 minutes had completely overwhelmed the terrorist forces in and around the complex, recording 15 encounters with the enemy and eliminating 40 terrorists. This included about 30 anti-tank squads as other IDF forces found and collected valuable intelligence material. The operation continued on Monday morning as IDF forces continued to maneuver both above and below the ground in Hamas's underground terror network that was dug underneath the city, keeping the pressure on Hamas as they tried to regroup in that area.
A new report by Release International says the persecution of Christians in mainland China now appears to be spreading to Hong Kong. We have more now from Andrew Boyd.
A new law could force Catholic priests in Hong Kong to reveal the secrets of the confessional. Partners of UK-based Release International say the British government has a responsibility to stand up for freedom of faith in its former colony. In the 35 years since China crushed the democracy movement in Tiananmen Square, the country has stepped up its persecution of Christians. Religious freedom in Hong Kong is now under growing threat. There are fears that new legislation could force Catholic priests to reveal the secrets of the confessional. Release International partner Bob Fu explains.
Potentially even the Catholic priest for up to 14 years imprisonment if they refuse to reveal the so-called crimes of sedition based on the believer's confession, a sacrament of repentance.
According to Bible Society, thousands of Hong Kong Christians have fled to the UK, establishing some 30 new churches. They say the Chinese church is now, by far, the fastest growing in Britain. Hong Kong became a British colony in 1842 and was ceded back to China in 1997. Bob Fu, a former Tiananmen protester, believes the British government has a moral obligation to protect religious freedom in its former colony.
The Hong Kongers are really expecting the UK to continue to stand strong for the religious freedom in Hong Kong and to speak up for them and also to take all necessary measures possible to protect those who flee out of the persecution.
A new report by the US Commission on International Religious Freedom says the crackdown on house churches continues.
Wow, praying for those persecuted Christians in Asia. Well, we had kind of a mixed bag weather-wise today in southwestern Alberta. Some sunshine, clouds, and even light showers. More rain is on the way this evening. Full weather details are on deck. We had some clouds mixed with sunshine earlier today, but still fairly mild. Tonight, there's a chance of rain developing with a low near 11 degrees. Wednesday, clouds and showers and high expected near 20. We should see a bit of a reprieve from the rain on Thursday with a high near 25. The clouds and rain will return again on Friday with the temperature remaining steady around 26 degrees. A balmy weekend is shaping up so far. Expect lots of sunshine and 24 degrees on Saturday, sunshine and 29 on Sunday. Even warmer on Monday, look at that, with a high near 33 degrees expected for Lethbridge. Now the average high for this time of year is 24 with an average low of 10. The record high was set back in 1985 at 33 degrees, and the record low was a cool 3 degrees back in 1992. The sun rose at 5:29 and set at 9:42. Let's see how Wednesday is looking across our home and native land right now. It should be mainly sunny and 21 degrees in Victoria. Lots of sunshine in the forecast as well in Vancouver and a high of 20. In our provincial capital in Edmonton, expect some thunder showers developing and a high of 23. And in Calgary, lots of rain in the forecast and a high of 20 degrees for Wednesday. Moving a little further east in the prairies, let's see what's happening in Saskatoon for tomorrow. Showers, cloudy and a high of 25 degrees. Pretty much the same picture in Regina, just slightly cooler at 23 degrees. And in Winnipeg, thunder showers in the forecast and a high of 24 degrees on Wednesday. In the central part of the country, we've had a lot of humidity lately, and it will continue. In Toronto, 29 with rain for high tomorrow. Ottawa, 29 degrees as well with clouds and showers. And in Montreal, partly cloudy with a high near 30 degrees on Wednesday. Over in Atlantic Canada, let's see what's happening in Fredericton for tomorrow. Lots of sunshine and a high of 29. A clear sky in Halifax with a high of 27 degrees. Pretty much the same picture in Charlottetown with a high of 26. And in St. John's, it'll be slightly cooler, rain and cloudy with a high of only 12 degrees on Wednesday. Tesla's global sales fell for the second straight quarter despite price cuts and low interest financing offers. Industry experts say it is another sign of weakening demand for the company's products and electric vehicles overall.
For the second straight quarter, Tesla's sales fell. This time it was about 4.8%, but it beat analyst expectations, and that caused the Tesla stock to go up during the day on Tuesday when the sales were released. The decline came despite Tesla adding low interest financing for its cars and cutting prices by a couple $1,000s during the quarter. It looks like maybe they're kind of on the way toward a turnaround and they could see positive sales in the second half of the year. What this all means is that Tesla had been struggling and may be coming out of it now, but the incentives that they had to do may have an effect on earnings, cut into earnings and its profit margins once it does second quarter earnings later in July. Sales at Tesla, which is now based in Austin, Texas, are important because they're kind of a harbinger for the rest of the world. Tesla is the largest electric vehicle maker in the world, and how its sales go usually are an indication of how electric vehicle sales are going to go for other manufacturers. We'll see more later when other manufacturers release details.
The Biden administration says it is trying to encourage more technological innovation across the United States. It is providing $504 million in implementation grants for 12 tech hub locations, including those in Montana, Nevada, and Florida. The move is meant to help avoid tech innovation from being concentrated in a few metro areas such as Seattle, San Francisco, Boston, and New York City. The money would support the development of technologies including quantum computing, biomanufacturing, lithium batteries, computer chips, and personal medicine. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 78 points on the day to finish at 21,953. The Dow was up 162 to 39,331. The S&P 500 was up 33 on the day to 5509, and the Nasdaq was up 149 points to finish at 18,028. West Texas Intermediate oil was down 28 cents to 83.10 US per barrel. Natural gas was down a penny to $2.47 US. Gold was down $2.45 to $23.2946 US an ounce, and silver was up 8 cents to $29.53 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.22 per bushel. Barley is at $5.99. Canola is at $14.72, and corn is at $7.24 per bushel. Live cattle were up 83 cents to $185.10. Feeder cattle August contract was up $3.73 to $261.10. Lean hogs were up 26 cents to $89.23, and the Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 73.11 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, WestJet says the full resumption of operations will take time after reaching a tentative deal with its mechanics. The airline says more cancellations will be needed over the next week following the Canada Day long weekend, which saw 830 flights canceled. 27 flights that were set to take off on Tuesday were also canceled. The Calgary-based airline says its aircraft are parked at 13 airports across the country, and in many cases, crews need to be transported to retrieve those airplanes. You know, it's no secret that both Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and U.S. President Joe Biden are both struggling at the polls. Will they both step down before their respective federal elections? Political columnist Brian Lilly will have his thoughts for us momentarily. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. Discover a new activity that you love. All are invited to this summer's Give It a Try events, hosted by the Lethbridge Sport Council. It's a great opportunity to try your hand at a new sport like climbing, badminton, handball, and more. Events are free to attend. Register in advance by visiting lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/program/Give It a Try. Go back in time and see what it was like to live as a pioneer. Coyote Flats Pioneer Village is a Western heritage museum located 1.5 kilometers south of Pitcher Butte. Walk through the village and visit an old-time railway station, post office, fire hall, school, and so much more. The museum is open daily from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. with admission of $10 for adults or $20 per family. For more information, visit coyoteflats.org. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
There have been a number of calls for both U.S. President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to step down with a couple of big elections coming up this year and next. They're just around the corner. Justin Trudeau has faced calls from within his own caucus to step down. Now, to chat about this in more detail is Sun political columnist Brian Lilly, who's out at the cottage. Brian, thanks again for joining us here. Will Trudeau get the message allowing his party time to rebuild and regain momentum heading into October 2025, or will he stay on and potentially go down with the ship?
Well, I think he's going to stick around, and part of the reason why is where I am. He loves coming to Georgian Bay, where I'm sitting, renting out a really expensive cottage on your dime and mine. He likes the flights, he likes to travel, he likes the trappings of this job. So yeah, he's getting calls like MP Wayne Long, who's a bit of an old-fashioned liberal, the centrist kind, the kind that doesn't hate business. Wayne Long came out of business. The reason he wrote that letter saying we need a change in leadership is that he's the guy, he's not running again. He started out well in the Liberal caucus in 2015 when he was first elected, but he was too friendly to business. Trudeau basically shunted him to the side. He's got nothing to lose. But, I can tell you how there are many more people like Wayne Long who are either going to be stepping away and think Trudeau should, or they're just nervous about their jobs. Do you think George Halal in Calgary is feeling real confident he's going to win again? Randy Boissonnault in Edmonton? I know in Alberta you joke about it being Redmonton, but it won't be Liberal red very long with Boissonnault and Trudeau running the show. So he's going to keep facing these calls. I'm still in the camp that says Trudeau won't step away, but time will tell. I mean, a summer full of pressure. He did say during an interview with CBC, the only media he apparently talks to these days, by the way, since the by-election is CBC, he said he wants to be prime minister for many more Canada days to come. The Canadian public doesn't share that sentiment.
Now, recent polls show just how unpopular Trudeau and the Liberals are. You even have a poll showing the coalition deal with the NDP is very unpopular.
It's even unpopular with NDP voters who don't think that it's doing a very good job. It's not helping the party. It's not helping Jagmeet Singh. This is a poll done by Leger for Post Media at the end of June. It showed a slight narrowing of the gap between the Liberals and the Conservatives federally, but it's still 41% say they would vote for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives compared to 27% for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. That's mostly based off of a bit of a bump in Atlantic Canada, and so, these regional numbers can bounce it around. Doesn't matter. That's still a big majority for Poilievre and the Conservatives if those numbers came in. The NDP is not doing well. They're down at about 17, 18% in most polls. They need to be polling higher. After that by-election in Toronto St. Paul's last week, everyone was talking about all the Liberal ridings that the Poilievre Conservatives could be stealing in Toronto. Well, there's a whole pile that the NDP could be stealing if they get their act together. There's going to be a by-election to replace former Finance Minister David Lametti in Montreal. And the NDP are feeling pretty confident that they can win the riding of LaSalle-et-Marde. Most of your viewers aren't going to know that riding, but they will know the guy who used to hold it, Paul Martin. This has been a Liberal stronghold forever, and the NDP could be stealing a West Island, well, kind of West Island. It's a Western Montreal riding. That's Liberal stronghold again. So the NDP, this deal is not helping them. They're too closely tied to the Liberals, and Jagmeet Singh saying it's the worst government ever and then voting for them isn't helping the party.
Now, Brian, one of the names you and I tossed back and forth, and we talked a bit about replacing Justin Trudeau, was former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney. But a new name has floated to the surface as a possible Trudeau replacement, and that's former BC Premier Christy Clark. Is that a serious option or maybe just speculation at this point in time?
Oh, it's going to be tough to tell, but interesting. On Carney, he was out posting on social media on Canada Day in both national languages as if he's already an elected leader. He's not, but he was talking about how beautiful the country is, how wonderful the country is. So we all know Mark Carney's running. He's also telling everyone who will listen that he's running. Well, now starts the whisper campaign about Christy Clark. And Clark is one of the, senior Liberals throughout the country who have come forward to say, Justin Trudeau should step down. You've had Catherine McKenna, his former environment minister, definitely on the left wing of the Liberal Party, part of Trudeau's inner circle at one point. You've had John Manley, a former Chrétien area finance minister, Percy Down, the former chief of staff to Jean Chrétien. But Christy Clark is different. The BC Liberals not the same as the Federal Liberal Party, and so. But Christy Clark, it's a coalition of federal liberals and conservatives, but Clark was very much on the liberal side. And so for her to come out and say that Trudeau should resign is very interesting. And then the whisper campaign, ooh, does Christy want this? Speaking to some people out west, they're saying, yeah, I'm hearing she does want it. So she would be a formidable force. And I interviewed one liberal strategist on the Full Comment podcast that just came out today. And he was saying what makes her interesting for him as a liberal is that she actually knows how politics operates. Some liberals think they've got to go outside the Trudeau cabinet. You can't have anybody too close. But Mark Carney doesn't know how politics works. Christy Clark, she does. And she knows how to do successful comebacks like she did in 2013 when the BC Liberals were way behind and she turned it around and won a majority.
So, Brian, what are your thoughts on our neighbors to the south? Will the Democrats replace Joe Biden in time for the U.S. federal election in November? I mean, following his recent presidential debate with Trump, many feel that he's no longer fit to lead.
Look, you know my view on American politics, Hal. I'm not a fan of Trump or Biden because they're both protectionists. They're both bad for our beef producers. They're bad for our forestry industry. They're bad for our auto industry. They're bad for Canadian industry. But Joe Biden's performance last Thursday was something else. I've thought for a while that, there's something up, medical or mental health issues that weren't being addressed. But I think he has declined precipitously over the last several months, and we didn't see it. You'd see bits of it, and then they'd explain it away. Oh, no, that was just this, or that was just that. An hour and a half, 2 hours on stage. Then he had to be helped down by his wife for 3 small steps. He couldn't complete sentences. The Democrats are in full panic mode. But the only way this plays out where Biden isn't the nominee is if he steps down and allows them to pick a new nominee at the convention in August. If Joe Biden is on the ticket against Donald Trump come November, Donald Trump wins in a landslide. That's going to infuriate some Canadians. That's going to excite some Canadians. Your mileage may vary. Either way, neither one of them is good for Canadian industry. Neither one of them is good for Canadian trade. But what a spectacle to watch down there as Biden became the story. Forget about Trump. Biden was the story. Trump won by being able to finish a sentence and a thought.
Brian, there was a brief strike at Calgary-based WestJet Airlines this past week. It had a major impact on travel for a number of Canadians, including my sister-in-law, who's trying to make her way back from Thailand. The canceled flights are still rippling through the system. Now, while this dispute was between the union and the airline, you say part of the blame must go to the Trudeau government. Why is that?
They've been trying to show that they are incredibly friendly with organized labor. All the parties have. They all recently voted to ban replacement workers in federally regulated industries, which would include airlines, would include cross interprovincial trucking companies, bus lines, banking, broadcasting, etc. So they've all been trying to show how friendly they are to unions. They all want the union vote in the next election. But this was a strike that was supposed to be settled, or a labor dispute. It wasn't supposed to get to a strike. This was supposed to be settled through binding arbitration. And the union still went on strike. And Labor Minister Seamus O'Regan sat on his hands for 2 days. This didn't have to go this way. WestJet was abiding by the binding arbitration, which, by the way, normally favors the unions rather than the companies. WestJet was abiding by that. There was no reason that the union shouldn't have. And when they didn't, Seamus O'Regan, Trudeau's labor minister, should have jumped in and told them in no uncertain terms, you can't be doing this, and you can't be stranding, how many thousands of Canadian travelers with what's essentially a wildcat strike. He didn't do that.
Brian, the city of Calgary is hoping to have the water main issues completely cleared up by the beginning of Stampede, which starts on Friday. Now, the water main break has been repaired, and the city is doing its water testing right now. While this may look like a Calgary problem, you say that governments all across the country need to really address looking at their pipes and aging infrastructure.
All across North America, this is a type of pipe that blew because of its composition. I was speaking with my colleague at the Calgary Herald, Don Braid, who's done some great work on this, and Don was explaining how this was a type of pipe that was used across the continent between 1955, roughly, and the early to mid 90s. So I think by 95, this type of pipe was no longer being used. Now, so this is Calgary's second main water main. The original one is still going with material from 92 years ago. That one has not broken. That one has not had stress tests showing problems with it. This is one Calgary should have known about 20 years ago, but that's another story. If you're in Lethbridge or Red Deer or Hamilton or Halifax, Nova Scotia, you need to be asking your city council, hey, do we have this type of pipe? And if so, have we tested it? One of the problems with this type of pipe is if it comes in contact with things like clay, it can deteriorate and weaken. And that's what happened here. If it is surrounded by sand and gravel, it can last 100 years, 200 years. That's what the promise was when it was put in. But this pipe built in St. Eustache, Quebec, used across the continent, made in other places as well, used across the country, across the United States, we could all be having these problems. When they built it, they said, it needs to go in this type of situation, but they didn't say, and if it touches clay, it'll pop in 50 years and cause you all kinds of problems. So, a lot of things that we thought were going to be indestructible back in the 50s and 60s when we upgraded our construction systems haven't worked out. We've got a big issue here in Ontario with the Ontario Science Centre being closed because this roof that was supposed to last 100 and 150 years is falling apart and in danger of imminent collapse after 50. Lots of problems like this going on, and these are the infrastructure issues that municipal politicians have to look at, but they rarely want to do that, Hal. They want to ask the province or the federal government for more money so they can build something shiny and new right in your neighborhood, get a photo in the local paper, get on Bridge City News, and get reelected. They don't want to deal with fixing things that are going to be breaking.
Now, Brian, here's a bit of a surprise. You recently offered some praise for an NDP politician, and that politician is Wab Kinew, the Premier of Manitoba. You said a big amen to something that Kinew said. What was it?
He posted a Canada Day message that I thought was spot on. He didn't just say, oh, I love Canada, and then apologize for Canada. He did a quick video message, posted it on social media, holding the Canadian flag, talking about how great this country is, talking about how great our history is. And then he says, and if you're Indigenous, you're part of this history too. You are part of this story. There was no apology. There was no, we're a great country, but, and I just love that. We need to see more of that. Wab Kinew did something else that surprised me recently. You know that Rachel Thomas asked a little while ago for the Trudeau Liberals to suspend the gas tax over the summer so that people could afford a road trip. And Mark Holland said, well, you're going to burn the planet down and lock the kids up. Wab Kinew just recently cut the gas tax for the summer as well so that people can afford a road trip. I'm going, this is a progressive that's actually listening to people. Good for him.
Yeah, it's funny. We chatted with our affordability minister, Nathan Neudorf, about that here in Alberta, and he says as long as oil is above $90 US per barrel, we'll consider it again, but it's not at that point right now. So looks like we'll be paying the full 13-cent provincial fuel tax as we hit the highways for summer holidays. Brian, now speaking of Mark Holland, let's circle back to Mark and that outburst, and we all saw what happened at Centre Block on Parliament Hill there. When he snapped at Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas, Canadians driving their cars for 10 days straight, watch the planet burn. Now, you're actually questioning whether or not the minister is okay. Can you explain?
He's had a lot of bizarre outbursts beyond that. He has, said that, as Canadians and as adults, we need to start talking about sex more, and he's going to talk all about it. What? No, we don't. And I don't need a minister from the government talking about this for me. He has had outbursts on how nicotine pouches are deadly. His department is funding heroin pills being handed out. That's absolutely bizarre. And now he's saying that, before the federal dental plan came along, the one with no dentists, what is it? Only 30% of the dentists in Alberta have signed up. And the premier wants out. He was talking about Premier Smith wanting out of the federal dental program. And he said, well, I was talking to this person who said before this came along, they had a patient gargling with gasoline. I don't believe it for a second, Hal. But he went on CBC. He made that claim. It wasn't challenged, of course, because it was Trudeau minister on the state broadcaster. But he made that claim. Is Mark Holland well, or is he suffering some kind of mental break? Does he need a break from politics? The voters want to give it to him, by the way. We just don't have an election at this point.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Cottage Country in Georgian Bay.
Thank you, Hal.
If someone brought up the term Tourette syndrome, what kinds of things would come to mind? Most of us probably don't really know a lot about it, but today we are going to learn a bit more about this disorder. And Jerry Firth joins us from Lethbridge. He is the coordinator of the annual Trek for Tourette fundraiser, which just occurred a couple weeks ago in Lethbridge. So he's here in Lethbridge. Welcome to Bridge City News, Jerry. Great to have you on. And I understand that fundraiser took place at Legacy Park, and it was quite successful.
Yes, thank you. Pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit more about Tourette syndrome.
Of course. Okay, so maybe let's find out, first of all, what your connection is with Tourette syndrome. Is this something that you yourself have been diagnosed with, or perhaps someone close to you?
Yeah, our oldest child, who's now the age of, well, almost 17 now, was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome at the age of 6. Myself and our youngest child also have tics, which is the most common trait within Tourette syndrome, but it's a part of a host of what would be known as tic disorder. Neither of us have been formally diagnosed, at least not at this point. We also have other individuals in our life that we know that live with and are affected by Tourette syndrome.
Okay, so what kind of a disease is this, and what are the symptoms? You did mention the tics there.
Yeah, so Tourette syndrome is a neurological disorder, which means it affects the brain and other nerves within the body. So this disorder involves repetitive and involuntary movements movements and sounds known as tics. It's part of a group of tic disorders and is the most severe of these types of disorders.
Okay, so can you maybe describe what some of these various types of tics, what these symptoms sort of look like?
Certainly. So tics present differently for everyone. It can range on a scale of severity from minor to rather large and uncontrollable. Movements can be present in any part of the body. That would include the face, neck, arms, legs, and so on. It could include things like flinching, twisting, flinging, among other movements. The vocalizations could include things like humming, grunting, coughing, and vocalizing certain words or phrases. For example, with our child, humming is something that's quite present for them. And they also have various words or phrases that they might repeat. Um, they have an arm flinch that they do when they flick out their arm to the side. But of course, throughout um, the development of Tourette syndrome that they've been living with, their tics have changed and morphed. For myself, for example, I also have most of my tics happen in my face. I also have a bit of a shoulder roll or a shoulder shuffle. You might actually end up seeing that at various times within this interview. Um, and then when I'm often preoccupied with watching TV or something, I will do a ticking noise with my mouth. And so, like I said, it's different for everyone and can look and sound different. And those tics can change throughout the lifetime.
Yeah, you mentioned the change there. Is this something that can gradually increase over time, or does it more decrease? Does it affect younger people more than older people? Do you grow out of it ever?
Yeah, good question. So it typically does change, and the more it's more common with children. People enter that adulthood can live with Tourette syndrome, but often it does decrease, and in many cases, it can actually even go away in time. That's not true for everyone, but I would say that it's more severe among young people.
Okay, all right. Now, we often see Tourette syndrome depicted in the movies as people who maybe like swear uncontrollably. That's kind of what it's known for. But how much reality is there to that?
Certainly, yeah. So movies and other popular media often depict Tourette syndrome on the higher end of severity. The uncontrollable swearing is often known as what's called, see if I get the term right, coprolalia. In reality, only about 10% of people impacted by Tourette syndrome display vocal tics that would consist of things such as the socially inappropriate cussing or swearing. This depiction, unfortunately, can be incredibly harmful and continues to provide the misconceptions of what Tourette syndrome is.
Yeah, no, for sure, definitely. Now, are people with Tourette's are completely aware of the tics that are occurring, or do they try to stop them from happening?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, there is some awareness. I would say specifically amongst the more severe tics, they're pretty hard to be missed by anyone, including the individual. There are times though where it becomes a bit of a normal function, and you may not acknowledge or recognize them, and others who are familiar with you also may not acknowledge them. And as I had mentioned earlier, that some of them can look like normal actions or behaviors by an individual, so they might go unnoticed by others and themselves. Unfortunately, though, some of the more severe tics can be quite uncomfortable and painful even at times. For example, our child has one where they thump their chest pretty hard, and that can be quite hurtful for them. So those types of tics obviously are ones that they're quite aware of. But like I said, they are uncontrollable and involuntary. So um, there are times that you can work to try to suppress them, but that can be very difficult for most.
How common is this disease, and does it impact one gender more than the other?
Sure. Uh, so tic disorders. So Tourette syndrome is a part of a group of tic disorders, and tic disorders affect about 1 in 100 children, and Tourette syndrome is more around 1 in 160. It tends to affect males more than females. I think it's a 3-in-1 ratio to a 4-in-1 ratio, somewhere around there. Um, uh, and it shows up and presents differently amongst males and females in some ways as well.
Interesting. Like in what way?
Just with regard to well, when it presents itself, males typically end up presenting a little bit earlier in life than females, and um, there are more prevalence with some of the motor tics.
I understand. Okay. What age group does it typically affect? I know you've mentioned you've got young kids even that have it. Does it usually start pretty young?
Yeah, so the first signs of Tourette syndrome usually occur between the ages of about 5 and 10. Now, they can occur as early as the age of 12 or even later, up to the age of 18, is when you might still first start seeing tics occur. They usually start out pretty mild in nature, often with the head, neck, or face, and then later present throughout other parts of the body, and the severity can increase over time as well. But yes, usually in younger ages is when it starts, and and as I mentioned, you can eventually start to grow out of them, and most people do, whereas they might live with it for their life.
Wow. Do you know how many people have been diagnosed with this in southern Alberta or in the Lethbridge area?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there's any stats available for this particularly, at least nothing that I could find that was accessible. But if we can imagine 1 in about 160 children being affected, I'm not sure exactly where we are with the population of children, but at 100,000 plus people in Lethbridge, I would say there's probably 300 individuals that are likely affected or living with TS.
Wow, incredible. So what do we know about the cause of Tourette syndrome? Is it genetic, or can the environment around us sort of contribute to it?
Certainly. Yes. So the exact cause itself is unknown. They continue to do research around this area and have not yet found any direct correlation. There are both genetic and environmental effects that then can play a role with Tourette syndrome. We do know that it is pretty common within families, so genetics do play a role, and it can be intergenerational. Now, with it, because there's no real understanding of the cause, there's also currently no cure for Tourette syndrome. However, there are certain treatments that can include things like medication, relaxation techniques, and psychotherapy.
Okay, well, that at least brings some sort of relief, hopefully. Is Tourette syndrome in any way associated with ADHD or OCD?
Yeah, so it's actually, well, the term would be that's often used as comorbidity, but certainly Tourette syndrome is often accompanied by any of those other neurological disorders, whether it be attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, oppositional defiance disorder, or OCD itself. And so each of those might create new dynamics or have different effects or impacts on how TS might be present, and then also create some other complexities and complications as a result.
Wow. Obviously, it has impact on the individual themselves, but what about what type of impact would it have on the family unit?
Yeah, certainly. So again, I think it would often depend on the individuals who are affected by Tourette syndrome and how the other neurological disorders that they might experience would impact their lives. This could have an effect on behavioral attributes, academics, social behaviors, etc. So it would very much depend on many factors in that way. Um, but I think that a lot of the challenges that come with it is because it's such a misunderstood diagnosis that there's also often a lot of social stigma. Plus, there's also minimal resources available to individuals and families affected. With that social stigma that exists as well, it can also feel like often an isolated experience for the individual and families. Um, and so, uh, again, it would range, but I can speak from our family experience. It's been an incredible journey of many highs and lows, and some often very difficult conversations and some difficult interactions and engagements, both with our child and ourselves, but also with the professionals and other resources that we try to interact and engage with, often trying to explore pathways for the success of our child.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I'm sure it hasn't been an easy road for sure, but hopefully it's brought you together a little bit closer as a family.
In many ways, it has, especially around us taking on a lead in coordinating the Trek for Tourette. It's something that when we first started as a family, shortly after our child was diagnosed, um, it gave us a sense of community where we weren't the only ones that were living with a child affected by TS, and also help us to better just explore and have conversations about what does it mean to live with TS, and have conversations with others in our lives as well, our family and friends, about what that might look like and mean.
Right. Speaking of which, is there, like, what type of help is there out there for kids who struggle with self-esteem from this stigma surrounding TS?
Yeah, certainly. So there are some professional supports that exist locally. Of course, there's some common things around accessing counseling services. We are fortunate enough to be able to have access to that with our child at a very young age through AHS, Child and Youth Mental Health Supports. There's also a local physician who's a pediatrics um, neurologist. And then we also have access to a psychologist, a psychiatrist. And so a lot of those professional supports have been wonderful. We have looked at and explored other potential supports in Calgary at the Children's Hospital there, where they have specialization in Tourette syndrome. But of course, the travel it creates and poses its own challenges. Uh, but of course, we've been fortunate as a family to be within family or schools that have been incredibly helpful and supportive. However, again, with the Tourette syndrome being rather misunderstood and just unfamiliar for most people, that the school setting has probably been one of the greatest challenges to try to explore and navigate.
Yeah, I can imagine. With that said, any advice for schoolmates as to how to respond or interact with a fellow student who might have TS?
Certainly, yeah, and I appreciate this question. So, our child, shortly after they were diagnosed, we encouraged them to share about what Tourette syndrome is and what it means to them and how they live with it, so that there can be this familiarity with it. Um, Really, I think if if anything, it's important that people understand that the movements and vocalizations are involuntary. Most people who are living with TS um, struggle with the perception when they might be seen as being interruptive. So I think it's important not just for the classmates, but for the teachers to also know that there's no intention in that area. And there are things that can be done to help in those situations. One, not just the understanding, but also sometimes stress can induce tics. So if a student is struggling in a setting and tics are being set off by their stress levels, to just provide another space for them, perhaps some quiet space for a while. Also, maybe make some accommodations so that they're able to do some learning or some of their exams at a different time or a different location. So it would depend on the individual, but I think it's really just about having understanding and starting some conversations about what are the needs to help be supportive for the individual, but obviously not in a way that's going to create more burden or challenges for the school, but rather create some partnership where everyone can benefit.
Yeah, definitely good advice there. And, education is always the best tool. But it looks like we're out of time. But thanks so much, Jerry, for being with us for this very informative discussion on Tourette's syndrome. And all the best to you and your family, of course.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, of course. Jerry Firth is the coordinator of the annual Trek for Tourette fundraiser for the Lethbridge Tourette Group. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.